deposit much easier to use than PNCs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you
Glad to hear it.
Yeah, because PNC just take your own picture and Fifter does it for you, and it's much easier. I know. Did you know that?
Folks.
Yeah, but
Did you know that was a difference between you and other banks?
I'll take it.
Welcome to our 8th Alloy Discussion Series event. I'm Nate Morehouse. I'm the director for the Institute for Research in Sensing. For those of you that don't know that much about it, IRiS, that's our acronym, is a new interdisciplinary research center at the University of Cincinnati focused on sensing, perception, and sensor technology development. And we mean that very broadly. These ideas and research subjects have been a strength for science, technology, and engineering at UC for several decades now. But they've oftentimes missed the opportunity to engage with the humanities, the fine and performing arts, and the social sciences. So one of the missions of IRiS is to not only bring together these historic strengths at UC, but to bring them together in conversation with these other perspectives. The Alloy series is something that we do 6 times a year through the academic year. Different place somewhere in Cincinnati. We're hoping to introduce you to spaces that you haven't been to before. How many people have been to DRIP before? Okay, good. I'm proud of you.
Right.
But that means a bunch of you haven't been here. DRIP is an amazing coffee shop and more. They have Ethiopian food on the weekends. They roast their own Ethiopian coffee here. Delicious. We thank them for hosting us. We hope that you come back when there's not an Alloy. They're just here in Camp Washington. We do have an upcoming calendar, so we have 4 more of these for the year. Our next one is going to be at Urban Artifact in their back room there. And that will be about perceptions and gender identity, both public perceptions as well as self-perceptions. And so that will be a really fascinating conversation. That's in collaboration with the Community of Reason and the Science on Tap programming that they do. And that'll be on a Wednesday night. We've got even more. We've got things about art conservation and sensing. We're going to have one at Clovernook Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired in the spring as well. So stay tuned. If you're curious about how to get directly emailed about this, we do have a newsletter that you can sign up for. We're not pushy about it. We ask you to sign up for it, but we're happy to direct you in that way. The only other thing that I want to say is that this is made possible through the University of Cincinnati, but we also partner with a variety of public and private entities that actually support our graduate program. We do have a graduate program with 16 graduate fellows every year. This year, our flagship partners are the EPA, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, Kroger, and Clovernook Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired. And so we'd like to thank them for enabling us to be here. They support the costs of this and other types of programming at IRiS alongside UC's funding. We are streaming this live on both Twitter and YouTube. And that also means that we can bring in questions and comments from our virtual audience. And so Nishay here, the IRiS postdoc and program manager, will be helping us to manage that. But these are not meant to be panels. They're not meant to be like, listen to there is a lot of brilliance here, but it's not just sit back and listen to the brilliance. We want you in the audience to participate as well. And these work really well. People from the audience speak as much of the time as the folks that we've invited in the center. So the conversation will get kicked off, but then we want you raising your hands, offering ideas, questions, thoughts, etc. And we'll work to manage that. Dominique Tanner is going to be our moderator today. Dominique is a PhD student in biomedical engineering. She'll introduce herself more formally in a minute, and she will also introduce the other people that we've invited into the conversation, but one of whom is Sierra Corbin, who's going to start us off with a spoken word performance.
All right.
And so I'll let Sierra, who is a PhD student in psychology, take the floor now.
For sure.
Oh, and one last thing.
Yes.
Thanks to DJ Big Tent back
Hey.
there for setting the vibe.
Do I need to stand or does it matter? Or?
Yeah, stand up.
Okay.
Project.
All right. Nobody. Okay. So hi everybody, I'm Sierra Corbin. I am a PhD student in experimental psychology. Shout out to my lab, the CAP lab over here in the corner. So I'm also a prior IRiS fellow. I was a part of the first cohort from 2021-22, as well as Dom and a couple other people that I see here from our cohort. So I'm going to do a couple of short poems that I've written and kind of give some commentary in between. So I am what I would call a multimedia artist. So I work mostly in digital art forms and poetry, and also playlist curation. So I do this thing typically called poem playlist pairings, and it sounds like what it is. So I usually do like some kind of visual art piece, make a poem that goes with it, and then I curate a playlist that I feel like suits that particular set of poems or poems. But these are not all part of those kinds of series, so I also just write individual pieces. I'm not super much like a spoken word poetry person. I'm more of like I write it and then people read it. But I'm totally happy to share. I'm looking forward to it. So I'm going to share 3 different pieces and kind of talk about them. So this first piece is called Indigo Spaces. It's a poem that I wrote back when I was really first getting back into writing over the pandemic. One of the things I really want to try to do with my poetry is capture and remember things, because I have what I think is a really bad memory. And so when I want to really capture the details of something that I've experienced or something that I loved, then I want to put it in a poem. So I try to pull as much of that perceptual memory into the poetry that I can. So Indigo Spaces is about time that I hung out with a friend at his house, and we like just hung out. It was a very quaint and quiet like time, and I was just thinking about like how the sun was hitting the walls and things like that. And so that's what this poem's about. So Indigo Spaces. Breathtakingly quaint 2-story hideaway planted in the breeziest part of town, yet it reminds me of all the palaces constructed in my dreams. Plush plum carpets poured throughout sunlit rooms, tinted only by incense smoke and cannabis clouds. As we banter back and forth in our collaborative euphoria, 2 artists in the midst of creating authentic joy, encapsulated in this ethereal space, outside of all the worlds we know, love and fear rage on incessantly, keeping us tethered to our realities. Yet we're always reaching for a taste of something more comforting to cling to. So in here, it'll always be just us 2, and all the solutions this moment of possibilities can contain. And in our tango of intermingled minds, moments, and memories, we become closer to the selves we keep searching to complete. In these indigo spaces, we reign supreme. So that's the first piece. You don't have to cry. Yeah, totally, go for it. It'll help me feel good about it. So that was the first piece. I write about happy things when I'm happy, but I also write about down emotions. I call it my hashtag sad girl poetry. I do a lot of that, a lot of anxious girl poetry writing. So this next piece is a piece that I'm working on to release. I said I was going to release it last month, but I lied. So it'll be coming out at some point. And so this poem is called CCTV. So CCTV, of course, refers to surveillance cameras or surveillance footage. And so it's really just me playing with this idea of self-perception, specifically how I look at myself, seeing myself from the perspective of others, and the limitations that kind of come with trying to see who you are to other people versus who you feel like you are to yourself. So, CCTV. I release skyward wishes for perfectly precise positioning between a point of passive observation and adoration. A precarious intersection somewhere between being forgotten and forced upon a pedestal. See, I'm fearful of the spotlight. Keep me near the ground. I'm afraid of heights. The pressure of being projected upon by every voice that crosses my mind, treating my own self-sabotage like kindness, I unfold and recoil repeatedly, turning over and over in a web of desires I've never wanted to entangle me. I teeter constantly until I spin out of anyone's control, retreating into the false sense of safety in my own undoing, held in limbo for the long haul as I battle unrelenting glances born of chronic self-surveillance. So that was one that I wrote when I was really in the midst of like unpacking some anxiety that I had about really post-pandemic being able to perform like I used to be able to perform in school and life, coming into knowing some things about my mental health and kind of figuring out how do I move forward with my new self that I have now, because old pandemic Sierra is not coming back. She's gone. Pre-pandemic Sierra is gone. So that's kind of that. And then the third piece I want to end on is actually from a series that I released earlier this year. Actually, through an IRiS series from last year, I was able to come into contact with Wave Pool Art Gallery here in Cincinnati. And they have I think it's a seasonal zine that they do that takes community submissions. And so I submitted to one of their series, I think it was their Summer Fall 2022 series. And the title or like the theme was called In Full Bloom. And so I submitted a series of poems and visual art and a playlist for that. And so I wanted to give one of the poems to y'all or let y'all experience one of those poems from that series. And so this series was called a collection of recollections, hopes, and fantasies. So it's playing with a little bit of lighter tones, thinking about how I enjoy perceiving different aspects of existence, how I feel when things are good in life, and the different things that I pick up on that maybe when you're upset or in a more closed off emotional space that you might not be able to actually pick up on. So this poem is from that series, and it's called Abundances of Optimism. There's a simple art to the way things feel good. When my senses flex the margins betwixt the real and the what if, I feel good. In being able to detect patterns and parallaxes, I marvel at the subtleties that tug at my curiosity. And if I close my eyes ever so tightly, I can rearrange the constellations or the layout of the constellations hanging high above me in the heavens. I rewrite the contents of my days and nights, inspired by all the beauty that cycles demurely through life. And it feels good to momentarily come to master space and time, bending each dimension in my honor, pushing the bounds of the here and the hereafter, embracing the vastness of optimism still buried deep inside my center soul, still in awe of how abundance springs forth, born from tranquility. It feels good to know that peace still remains. And that's all I got. I hope you guys enjoyed. But yeah. And I'm excited for the rest of the discussion.
All right, y'all, we're going to go ahead and move on. Let's give one more hand clap for Sierra. I've known Sierra for going on about 5+ years now.
We've been hanging tight.
We've been clank. And it's just so breathtaking to see how much you've grown in your work and doing spoken word. So very, very proud of you. And she's also great. So hello, everyone. I'm going to stand up so y'all can see me, hear me. Hey everybody, I'm Dominique. I am the IRiS grad fellow at large. Here I am a 5th year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering. Hopes to graduate in 2023. So it's so good to see everybody coming out here. Thank you all for sharing your time and sharing the space with us. So today's topic is on AI, words, and artificial intelligence and realm of perception. We'll get more into that because I'm sure we have a lot of burning questions around artificial intelligence in terms of how it plays into perception, how we think about like words, how we think about images, how we think about things being projected in reality and artificial reality. So if you got any good questions, please burn them up in your brains and spin them out during this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the rest of our speakers today. So first we have Sam Burton, is a legal counsel officer at Fifth Third Bank. Thank you for being here. Dr. Kate Bonsinga, director of DAP at UC. Thank you again for being here. Sierra Corbin, who just did her spoken word. She is also a PhD candidate in experimental psychology, also set to graduate spring 2023. And we have Drew McKenzie. Oh, thank you for being here. And then we have Drew McKenzie, a product owner at a great company here in Cincinnati called Subterra. So thank you for being here. And you know, all these people were hand selected in terms of their expertise, you know, that are around or maybe directly related to artificial intelligence or perception, how we visualize things. And so we are definitely going to have a great conversation. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to go ahead and sit down, y'all. So we think about AI, right? So in my research, I do machine learning. And, you know, of course, we know AI and machine learning go hand in hand. But we think about AI, we think about perception, we think about how things are being projected, how we project things as people. You know, you guys have seen these new art of AI pictures, right, from the app Lensa, yeah. I'm like, now, you know darn well. I'm like, this is very interesting. And you see these range of images and how people are being like perceived, how they perceive themselves. I haven't done the Lensa app, so I don't really know. I guess you upload a photo and it's like, hey, now you're this mythical space person who goes off and looks real cool with this.
After you get them $6.
$6? Oh my gosh. I'll visualize myself for free at home. No,
Gotta pay for that computer.
listen. But that's so interesting, right? Like even just apps like that, and you can perceive how you look. You can project how maybe you want to look in this reality that we live in. We think about words, right? We think about images. There is an interesting book that I read called Algorithms of Oppression by Dr. Sophia Noble. She's a professor at UC. And one of the things she talks about in terms of like artificial intelligence and machine learning is how certain people are projected in reality, or how, you know, they should be quote unquote perceived, right? So there's a lot of whitewashing, there's a lot of lightning, there's a lot of things that go into that. So, you know, from everybody's expertise with these topics, and you know how it relates to like your work or how you think about how it advances society or technology, but we still have questions around like the ethics of it. I'm curious to know, what are your guys' thoughts, and everybody from the audience too, in regards to that? What do you guys think? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I have a friend who works at a university in Norway,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a PhD in literature, but he has gotten into AI and especially computer-generated literature, and now computer-generated images based on word prompts alone.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been on Facebook recently. Sorry, I'm dating myself. I guess I use Facebook. But he has been giving them the computer prompts, and it will generate this art. And this theme that he's been working with the last 2 or 3 weeks is Republicans in Love. So he'll like put in and it'll generate this art, and it's so bizarre and it's so unsettling in so many ways, because it just looks so much like, well, like you said, with the lightning and the perfection, and it's Stepford. Again, I'm dating myself with the Stepford Wives references, but this idea that, you know, this perfectly curated and manicured community. And so the art kind of looks like that, to the point where it becomes almost like it's the whole uncanny valley, right? Mm-hmm. Where everything's a little too perfect, a little too close, so it gets kind of gross. Mm-hmm. But I was really stunned by, because he'd been doing just generating text, but when he made this merge into text-based art generation, that was when it really got crazy to me. That because to me that sounds like a computer has like cognition mm-hmm. in some way. That if it's doing some kind of abstract thinking to get from a word to an impression, you know. So that's kind of what brought me here tonight, as much as anything, is, you know, you can train a computer to spit out words and to mimic words, but this idea that there's this something abstract going on, that's when it starts to get really bizarre.
You know, it's first of all, that's Republicans in love. I just want to see what those pictures look like because I know that is.
I assure you, it's not nighttime. You might have some nightmares.
Oh no! But you know, that's an interesting thing, right? You're saying computers have cognition, and when we think of cognition, we think that as like a human trait, you know. But you know, it goes back to us, you know, as we program algorithms, we program technology, and the data that we put in it, you know, what are the things we're trying to see that come out of it? So that's very interesting. But also, thank you for coming just to pique your interest in that. That's really cool. Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, so I am a lawyer, so I'll try to not keep it like too boring, I promise. But part of what I do is IP, so I do copyrights and trademarks. So when it comes to AI, you get in this whole new ethical area of who owns it and who's creating the database. And if you take a database and you take 25 of your poems and 25 of someone else's poems, and then they make a new poem, but it's not yours, but is it theirs?
Right.
So it leads to this whole new dilemma. And we've seen that with a lot of art. And whether it's actually transformative enough to be copyrightable. So that's kind of my lens to all of this. So it's very interesting to try to figure out who owns what and if you can even own it or should you own it.
So in that example that you just gave us, who owns that new poem?
That's the question. Because, well, there's this other debate as to, okay, so the computer generated it. That's not technically a human being. And our copyright law says it has to be a human being to own a copyright. So there's this recent case of, I'm going to forget her name. I wrote it down somewhere. But this artist made a comic book series using AI art. And she fought to get it copyrighted. And she had to prove that there was enough substantial human interaction with the machine that it was her thought process. So I think
She made the decision about what images
Yes.
went into the comic book. So therefore
Yes.
she owns the
Correct.
property, I would think.
Correct. That was the debate, and she did get it copyrighted. There hasn't been like any litigation on it, but the USPTO did approve it. So it's kind of interesting to see.
You know, I'll chime in that I met a very interesting artist. I'm not a practicing artist myself. My background's art history. And so what I do is I kind of keep track of what contemporary artists are doing and thinking about, sort of try to find the ones that I find to be the most compelling. And then I self-identify and have practice as a curator, so pulling together contemporary art exhibitions. One of the artists that talks about collaborating with AI is an artist named Tiffany Calvert, and she lives in Louisville, Kentucky. What she does is she inputs into style GANs, have you heard of that? Style GANS. The words Flemish and Netherlandish still lifes. And it outputs an image of flowers on a table. She prints out that image, adheres it to a canvas, creates a stencil with which she blocks some of that print, and then uses her own renderings, her own hand, to paint the rest of the canvas in her interpretation of a still life. And then she peels off that stencil. So you see part of the print is revealed, but most of it is her gestural paint.
Sure.
And they're absolutely beautiful. And she's sort of talking about sort of the combination of machine generated and human created forms. And also I think about commerce too. Like if you think about Netherlandish tradition, especially the still life, especially the tulips, which were really a sort of form of currency during the 17th century in the Netherlands. And now is painting also can be a form of sort of commodified currency or commodified objects. So I think she's really delving into a lot of interesting territory. And those paintings are definitely hers. but she talks about the AI or style GANs as her collaborator, even though it's not a human collaborator. It's a machine that collaborates with her. So that's one example of what I have found to be an interesting example of artists sort of harnessing the power of AI to create new and compelling images.
I would actually, so I'm an aerospace engineer at UC, and I would actually like to add on to what you just said. I mean, it's so interesting because as an engineer, we work on various applications like drones, like autonomous cars and robots, and we start from an elegant set of equations that come from basic physics and mathematics, and those elegant formulations that allow you to control systems like these. And then came like AI, and people thought, oh, that's going to replace all the math that we have done for like hundreds of years. And like since I have been a PhD student, I've realized that I don't think AI can replace all that elegant math in one go, because if you try to, I mean, what it does is it kind of requires so much power and so much energy behind it that it's basically like inefficient. And from my experience, it's like it has to combine together with the existing mathematics. So let's say we have like a big formulation, and there's some things that we don't know for sure what they are, and we have to kind of try and get a particular value. So you kind of put AI to that particular aspect, and but the rest of it remains like the elegance that comes from human intelligence of like how you come to that particular solution, how do you define certain things. And personally, I've seen better results when you combine traditional methods with AI rather than just replace traditional methods with AI. So I totally believe in what you said, because I don't think it's just like in art, but I think that works in engineering as well.
And I think just going back to copyright, I mean, my definition, because the question of what is art, that's a very expansive and almost rhetorical question. But one thing that is for certain in my mind is that it needs to be human made. So like people will say, oh, a monkey could make an artwork like that, but that's not then art, because it's not intentional, it's not deliberate. So that's where I draw the line.
Funny. There's actually a case in copyright law about a monkey. So it's funny you say that.
Is that right?
There's a monkey that took a photograph using someone's camera. Yeah, you might know.
Yeah.
And there was this whole debate. It took like a couple years because, lawyers, we got to go with the fun cases. So the question was, who owns this copyright?
Yeah.
Is it the zoo that owns the monkey? Because the monkey can't own it. Or is it the one who owns the camera, or does no one own it? And they decided no one owned it because a monkey is not a person.
Interesting.
So a chimp, sorry, not a monkey.
Yeah, I think it's I was having a discussion the other day with a colleague. We're facing the likelihood of not already occurring incident of students submitting AI drafted essays. I thought, well, we should submit AI drafted feedback. For art is so someone like Ken Goldsmith, who's an interesting book, Unlearning, advocating for the active incorporation of plagiarism within curricular design at college level. He's primarily a poet and writer, but the artwork that one of the more interesting artworks he did was to copy out the entire New York Times in one day, every single piece of text in it, and present that as a work. So, but going back to the early 20th century, the subversion of authorship and subjectivity, of course, is not central to contemporary art, most famously Duchamp. But that withdrawal of subjectivity has been thought of as an anti-institutional avant-garde gesture, as one that undermines marketplace and institution. And so I wonder how artists, if that narrative is still viable, how artists would treat AI, would subvert it, would embrace it. Because in one sense, a more radical position would be to say, would be the author, if you like, or the artist who could permit, or the writer who permits whatever is used from that program as an authentic piece of work. That's the work, unaltered, unmodified. So the person who modifies the artist who modifies the AI-generated image would then be of less interest, let's say, than the one who just allows the issue product to exist. And so another writer, Isabel Graw, who's ironically named Love of Painting book, she does not really love painting, but says that the reason painting is still so ascendant and so highly valued is that it's one of the final reservoirs of subjectivity for the marketplace of collectors. And so that is an interesting argument where most other art forms have successfully evacuated that notion of authenticity residing in the subject, but painting really keeps it in the foreground. And I reminded in that sense of a conversation I heard in 1984 at a gallery called Feature in Chicago. Those of you who know Sherry Bean's work, rephotographing other artists' photographs, particularly Walker Evans. The dealer behind the desk was describing a dinner party he had been at, this would be Hudson, who ran the gallery, the previous night, saying another visitor to the dinner party had complimented the host on the Sherry Bean photograph he had on the wall. And the host got really angry. He was saying, no, that's of genuine Walker Evans, not a Sherry Bean. So I think these debates are fascinating. They've been going on for a long time. I don't really see AI changing things that much, other than to provide perhaps a new level of entrancement that we can be seduced by or not. But we still have to, let's say, deal with it as any other tool and figure out what our position as creator and responder is.
It's another source of imagery, really.
Another source of imagery.
Yeah.
So I agree with all of our questions over here. Like the issues that we are trying to raise is absolutely important, and makes me think that we are looking at artificial intelligence and their intervention within the human world in a more service format, like how we look at things on social media or internet just because it is another thing on the internet for us. But instead, if we look at it from a very product-oriented lens, it might make a shift in our decision making towards AI. For example, we use calculators. We do not say that, oh, if humans start using calculators, is it a calculator's math answer or it is human answer that's correct? Like, who owns the ownership of the answer? Of course, the humans own the answer, right? Like we did the calculation. We are only using the technology as a product to help us cut down on the time utilized to come up to a solution that we are trying to look out for. Of course, AI is larger than calculator, like we are just not using it for math-oriented or arithmetic-oriented issues, but largely it could be also in the creative domain or in the education domain or in the tech domain. Various, in fact, multiple more domains than that we have foreseen before. And that is itself the reason why it maybe challenges us to think about the ethical dimensions of it and other dimensions of it. But the solution to it is to accept that it's not going anywhere, because it's not going anywhere, right? And work around in ways whereby we can say how constructively it can come to use. Anything we put on the internet is not our ownership. In fact, I come from qualitative research background. So when ethnographers undertake narrative researches, most of these narratives that are based on victim stories are anonymous, because victims don't like to put out their name to the things that they are sharing with the researcher. In that situation, when the book is published or the research paper is published and that narrative is picked up in policy or in other dimensions, who owns the ownership of those narratives? Generally, the researcher gets the credit for it. But is it the researcher's story? It's not. In the same way, like if art is coming out of artificial intelligence, or legal help is coming out of artificial intelligence, or other helps are coming out of artificial intelligence, there might be a little difference in terms of ownership. Maybe the company making the software might have some share. I don't know where the future leads us, but I do think it is just another product-based thing like that.
You know, that brings me to, I'm pickling you for a little bit. Drew, you know, being with Subterra, you guys use artificial intelligence, you know, to digitize, you know, underground infrastructure. And the point you made of saying, you know, using it as a product to solve a problem, ultimately to, help people or help some kind of endeavor.
Mhm.
I'm curious, what creating these, infrastructures underground, which I think is really, really cool, but I can't even imagine the complexity with that. So, the common theme I've heard is like, AI isn't going anywhere. How we perceive things, fluctuates here and there, but ultimately it's still being recycled, right?
Mhm.
And so we see a lot of similarities with that. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts, and how would that work in what you do?
Well, I think the artist conversation is very different than what we're doing, right? I mean, going back to your point about we're helping do something for the public good. So everything that we're doing is in the public domain, right? Everything that we take a video of with a commercial grade camera or consumer grade camera, and then all the processes that we're running on top of that, right? Computer vision, machine learning, AI, all that gets bundled together, which is really sad, right? Because it makes these definitions incredibly broad. But when you really dumb it all down, we're just doing jobs that nobody wants to do. So, if we're going to take a video of 4 miles of underground pipe, right? Water is flowing through these pipes. Historically, somebody would have to sit there and watch 4 miles of pipe. Well, we look at that and say, well, maybe can we just look at the things that are problematic? Because machines are really great if you train them well and do it enough, that they're just going to give you the segments that you need to look at. So instead of somebody spending hours, literally hours, they might spend 10 minutes, because we don't want them looking at video that doesn't add any value to anybody, right? As a ratepayer, a taxpayer, right, for the services in the city, or even frankly them as a person, as a human, no matter what their role is, their education, whatever it is, whatever their certifications are, they don't want to watch that screen for 4 hours. Now, maybe if it's like some Netflix drama, yeah, you might be into it, right? But so that's where I think we see in our world, we see the really great things that come out of kind of the human assisting side of the activities that can be transformed. Because imagine if that person can only spend 10 minutes on that. Imagine all the other good things and other value adds that they can do in their day that right now aren't getting done, right? And we, as the people that utilize all these services, we actually want those things to get done. Like I like to say that we're in the business of preventing a problem when it costs us maybe $1,000 or $10,000 or $100,000 instead of $1 million, 10 million, 100 million. I mean, that's the kind of numbers we're dealing with. So I think it's a very different kind of conversation, but I hope that that's where a lot of people, and probably a lot of brain power in this room, I hope that's where we're spending all of our time. Because I personally would rather still walk into a gallery and know that some person really was deliberate about making something that I'm going to spend some time outside of my working day, right? Versus maybe helping, assist me in some professional endeavor to serve as, my neighbor.
I think too, just from watching like the discourse about AI generated art, specifically with the visual art with the Lensa app and things like that, kind of taking over Twitter and that availability of maybe an AI generated piece that you can now get from an app that'll spit out for $6 100 pictures of whatever prompt you put in. I haven't done it either, so I don't know the specifics, but versus paying an artist to commission you a piece that they can then benefit from in terms of creating something new, but also in terms of being able to feed themselves, being able to support themselves, whatever. I think that's the issue ethically when you talk to artists about the implementation of AI and the limitations. It's like, it's one thing to say, okay, I can put whatever prompt into a computer and it'll spit out this image that's like this fantastical me as a green fairy alien or something like that. But with, as far as I know about AI, there is like the feeding of information to train the system. So you're feeding in art that already exists from somewhere, and it might be an ethical gray area in terms of like law-wise, but what spits out is something that somebody could potentially have drawn for you in their particular art style. So then instead of commissioning that piece, you get it for $6, 100 pieces. There's a person who could have done it for you, and it would have been one authentic piece. Now, the other side of that is I played around more with like the kind of AI that's where you put in a word prompt and then it'll give you like an image based on that. And it was like a free situation. And I think that it's great for generating ideas. Maybe if you want to get a portrait made of yourself and you want to be a green alien princess or something like that, you can type in me as a green alien princess, get an idea of what that might look like if you don't know what you would want it to look like. And that could be a point at which you would then commission somebody to give you their interpretation of it. So maybe it's a helpful thing to visualize something that you can't really envision. Just like how if you don't know what you have in your closet, you don't really know what outfits you could put together. So I think that's the ethical dilemma for people who do art for a living instead of people who do it as a side project or like just a passion project is, if we take AI art and say, okay, this can replace human art, which I don't think that we're, as this discussion is coming about, we're saying that that's not the case. But if that is the attitude that some people have, that leaves this market of people who try to do art for a living without that financial support and without that creative practice too, because artists develop their skills from practicing creating. And yes, you can create a bunch of stuff just to do it, but how profitable is that going to be, again, if you do it for a living?
But if you inverse it, if you say that, well, how many million artists are there in the world at the moment, speculating 50 to 10, each of them producing 50 to 100 artworks a year. Collectively, isn't that rather like a computer or an AI? And the differentiation between those works is probably no greater than an AI device would produce itself. So I see little difference between what's already in the world and what we're fearful of, or we're trying to understand how to change that situation. The number of MFA students, I'm responsible for the MFA program at the University of Cincinnati. It's not that different from other MFA programs around the country. The number of students who generate the number of artworks they make during their degree, it's an absurd quantity, and that absurdity is no more meaningful than what an AI application can generate.
So, do you have your hand up to you? No? Okay.
I think that there's two parts that I'm hearing a lot of. One is this extreme romanticization of the human in a way that I'm not quite sure I'm on board with. I'm kind of a postmodernist, and I think it's quite lovely, but it seems kind of naive, this idea that, oh, there's nothing as precious and unique and valuable as the human mind, when I'm not exactly convinced of that. It sounds horrible, but, and the other thing is the economic side of it. When you're talking about, I'm really fascinated with what you were saying, this idea, and economists have been talking about this for centuries, about like when we make work less so that people have more time to be creative, right? Mm-hmm. But we never end up filling that space that we get bought out of convenience. The drudgery part goes away, but then more work takes its place, because that's the economic model, at least of capitalism. Yep. Is that you've been freed up to produce more rather than to now have leisure. I remember in 1980, Time Magazine's cover said we were going to all be working 20-hour work weeks into the year 2000. And that's hilarious to me, to all of us, I'm sure, because we were going to have so much convenience and mechanization and automation and everything. And of course, that's not how it works. So, all of these artists who are going to lose maybe their commissions, or all of these writers, because that's what I write and I teach. And if you can train a computer to do what I do, I'm sure a computer doesn't need healthcare. So it's going to be cheaper to do that. Mm-hmm. So I feel a real existential crisis here sometimes as well. But then there's always something else that's being piled on, the drudgery and the labor never ceases to go away so that we can be more creative. So that's just what I'm hearing. I'm not offering any sort of solution or other perspective.
And then
So I resonates very much with me what you said, and I think the idea of reducing work is what I want to speak to. That yes, this idea has been about for a long time that increased automation, increasing and AI is part of it or driving it in the inside. That we need to work less in order to produce the same, right? But what we actually do is produce more. And I think part of it is not just that, because frankly we could, right? We could just every one of us could just work 20 hours, we would still keep productivity. It would work. In fact, a couple of countries are trying this out, or a couple of companies are trying this out. But what I think that we forget about in this conversation is the void that we try to avoid, like work fills this void. And one of the things that could fill the void that we have when we work only 20 hours or less, or 1 day a week, or whatever it's going to be, we could fill it with creativity, right? And instead, we are creating more technology that then makes this creativity a product.
Yeah.
And that we can buy then with all the money that we earn working 60 plus hours a week. And instead of actually, holding back and trying to get out there ourselves, so we kind of avoid what I think is a vulnerability here by allowing, first by overworking, but then also by allowing machines to be creative and try to fill this void for us, so then we can just consume it. It's a lot safer to consume.
Okay. So I feel like the AI we are talking about right now is still a work in progress. So there's like a really long way where we will be worried about all of these problems which we are discussing right now. But interestingly, what Sierra was suggesting about the artists who could be using AI to create art, who are not like real artists, who can't draw. I just wanted to give an example of this one artist you might know, Replicant. And he's very famous actually. So he creates art from data. So he has like literally he has like trillions of gigabytes of data, which he trains his deep neural networks to generate like fluid memories in a visual format. So he even used data from like EEGs, where like people are told to like recall their childhood memories, and EEG is recording all the neuron firing, and it is using that to create data, and that data is fed to the neural network, which is creating the art. So, but about that, so the art it is producing based on the data is actually very original because it uses GAN. So GAN is a generative. I think I don't recall about the date, but it's I don't recall about it. So that is a form of a neural network that actually creates new, say, words or new art. So
images from words.
New images, not from words, but like from anything. It creates something. Even if you give it like 2 words. Say if you give like a picture of banana and fishbowl and say, banana in a fishbowl, so it will create that, but it will not use the image of banana, image of a fishbowl to put those things together. It will generate an image of banana because the way AI learns about pictures is it observes the pixels and the color codings, so how they are arranged, and it forms relations. So these relations, or you can call those like features for a particular object. They're like multidimensional, like to the point where we can't even imagine like how many dimensions there are. It could be like over 500 dimensions. But yeah, that work is like very original, and like that artist, for example, Andal, he has to put up a lot of effort in that, and he has like so. But when you are creating this kind of art, you are creating jobs as well, because you're employing more people who work on your neural networks. You're including artists as well who are evaluating that art, and because they have supervised and unsupervised learning models both. So it's not like it's really a threat or anything, because it's gonna give like more people job and opportunities to explore. Whether even artists are involved, because AI can just generate the art, it cannot be validated. So
No, that's very interesting. We'll have to look that up. You're saying taking these images, but not necessarily like merging them to create like this new one image, but potentially something totally different, which I think is very interesting.
so there is this one, Doggy.
I was just about to get into Dolly. Yeah.
If you give Doggy, say Vincent Van Gogh, show me a painting of show me Vincent Van Gogh made a painting of University of Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
So it will use those, what can I say, design elements of the style of Vincent Van Gogh, like how he
like the dark imaging or things like that. Yeah.
paints. So you won't be able to recognize the difference between real painting and a AI-made painting. I think that it would be interesting, like what measures we would have to distinguish the real and artificial.
I think I'm still on the wait list for Dolly. I can't use it. Dolly has like 1 million plus people on the wait list to use it. So
Is that an app?
It's like a program, so
Okay,
you can go
gotcha.
and just play with it, and you can like you said, take these images and it'll create something, but not necessarily merging like the 2 or 3 things that you mentioned. It'll do something totally different.
Gotcha.
It's really cool. They actually,
Want to check out Midjourney? That's the case.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mid-journey?
Midjourney. There's
Midjourney.
no waiting list for it, and it's.
So I don't know
A lot of people use it. Yeah.
Mid-journey. I have to check that out
Yeah.
too. You said something about a void we need to fill, right? You said something about the ethics in regards to artists and, paying $5, $6, get hundreds of photos versus something that is one of a kind, very authentic. Using AI to solve a problem, it's not really going anywhere. And I think of these things and it really makes me question, how well or how deep do we really have to dive into our creativity to keep this void filled, right? To keep this thing in rotation to continue to help people. So like in my work, I use machine learning. I build like patient specific models because everybody's different. But constantly having to be creative, right? I can't use this one model for everybody. Like, no, I want this to be for each and every person because what they're going through, what they experience is very different, but constantly having to be creative, right? Because these people may change. This person may change what was once a model that was for them for like 5, 6 years, something or some kind of development or some kind of change has happened. Now I got to be creative and create a new model or maybe, alter it a bit. So I wonder what is the line to where, we have to really just continue to be creative to make sure, we're not tired of trying to fill this void, right? We actually touched on that in the last Alloy series of like, all right, you know what? I'm tired. I'm gonna step away. I'm gonna just let it do, right? Creating these things. We're doing perceptions of like people or things, words, images, to where, like you said, we kind of steer away from tradition, which I'm old school. I like within reason. That doesn't cause harm or or anything like that. All tradition is good tradition. I'm gonna just put it out there. So, but the tradition of putting in things in AI to keep it going because it's only going to do so much as long as we put so much in it, right? And then it kind of gets this memory of like, okay, I know what this is. I'm gonna go ahead and spit it out, and it's like, okay, sure, that's fine. No, because now you've already stepped away from the creativity, just letting it do its own thing, to the tradition of working, continuing to fill that space to keep this thing evolving.
I have a very provocative statement for
Oh, no.
No, I would actually say that, and not in a bad way, but I would actually say the only two things that fill our void are creativity and service. But a lot of, not just art is creative, right? Science can be creative.
Yes.
Work can be creative. All of the things you do can be creative, but they can also be numbing in a sense. If we overdo it, we just get burned out.
Desensitized and stuff.
So I would say the only two things that fill the void are creativity and service.
I think too, like, I like that you said that. I think part of art is catharsis for the artist. And I don't know what kind of art I would fall into. Like when people go start saying like postmodern, I'm like, what's that mean? I don't know. Not my expertise, but I do romanticize the human aspects that go into art, because I feel like in a way it's at least the art that I engage with, it's a way of people pulling out more authentic things that maybe they don't get an opportunity to say. Maybe things that are in their mind and they're trying to figure out a way to express it. Like in the same way that language evolves to give us new ways to interpret things that we can't really describe any other way. Like we're trying to put concreteness to abstractness, is the same way that I feel like at least the artists that I interact with tend to view their expression. Their self-expression is an extension of themselves. So, and I don't know, I think that's a lot of the pushback too that's coming from the artist community with not understanding AI, of course, is one aspect of it, but also seeing it as almost a competing force against the creative that comes from a human or the creative that comes from a monkey. But I think that's the thing that is hard. It's like, okay, well, if you say, okay, we can offload the work to people who can design the system, okay, well now you're, for lack of a better term, gatekeeping who can actually do the work. You have to now be able to like program an AI to do the thing, or you only benefiting from the output to the extent with which you can put whatever prompt in or something like that and get something out. And so I think for people who feel like they put a lot of labor and a lot of thought and like who invest a lot of mental, physical, and economic resources into their output, it's hard to imagine replacing that with a computer or replacing that with an algorithm that can just do something very similar. But also my major issue with everything is like the commodification. It's like if artists didn't have to pay rent, then they could just art, right? If we didn't have to pay rent, Mom said this to me the other day. Hey, Mom. She was like, if I didn't have to pay rent, I could have all the things, I could do whatever I wanted to do. I could read all the books. And I'm like, yeah, but on the first, the landlord is coming. So it's like, there's always, like Tamara said, this like desire to fill this void with either creativity or work. And those things are usually at competing odds with the way that society is progressing, or the way that I think a lot of people, at least in Western society, are experiencing life right now. And so I don't think that AI is inherently a bad thing, but I think that it comes with that limitation of understanding that there are people who are resistant to it because they feel like it's removing the person from the process.
I think the other thing that artists are really good at is critiquing the status quo, calling us to action for a better world. I don't see machines doing that.
Well,
Maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, tell us.
there is, and maybe you've seen this video of a machine that was created. So it was constantly losing oil, and it vacuums up its own oil, right? And it was just eventually it can't get enough of the oil back into the system to keep it from just wearing out. So it had definitely going to die without some kind of maintenance. And it is tragic. And of course, it's probably some kind of fallacy that I'm projecting my own sense of fatality or mortality onto this machine. But it does seem to get like the movements become frantic and desperate, and you can't help but feel a very human drama being played out in the existential crisis of this machine trying to prevent its own extinction. So I don't know that's not necessarily, I don't think the machine actually felt that. I think it's my ability to project my own.
And that's the difference.
Yeah.
That you saw that happen. You saw that in that machine's activity, but I don't think it did. So that's what differentiates humans from, we're emotive, we feel. And we also,
Yeah.
that would be my counterpoint to that.
So it's something like we are always thinking from the perspective of how we can make AI better.
Yeah.
Or is AI going to replace us? But I think there's also the other aspect that AI pushes us to be more creative. Like for example, like there was this Google AI in Britain. There's a company called DeepMind. They created this AI that could play checkers, and they found out all the champions from all the continents, like human champions, and they were like, okay, are you going to play against the AI? And one by one, all the continental champions lost to the AI, and then the world champion came. There's like a 5-match tournament, and the first 3 matches, like the world champion gets knocked down. I mean, like there's no competition at all because the AI only thinks from the perspective of being perfect and efficient and trying to just win the game. But the 4th game, they say is one of the most interesting checkers games ever because the human learned from that and like brought that much creativity into the game that nobody had ever seen before. So I personally feel that.
So did the human win?
Yeah. So the 4th match, he lost the 5th one again. But you
won for 5.
Yeah,
Right.
But you could say we usually say in like a very tense environment, a tense working environment, that competition brings more clarity and more efficiency in like your thoughts. Like I've seen doctors usually do that to figure out some like of the diseases and stuff. But like on a general like scale where people are trying to solve like small problems, like I just want to see a study where they see like has human intelligence like evolved since we came into contact with AI or something.
I wonder.
Because I do believe that it does affect humans as well in an opposite, like it doesn't have to be always negative, but it makes us think more.
Right.
Well, I think again, we're not in the art space, right? But or the creative space by any chance. But coming to your point, when we are able to help someone who's been doing a set of routines manually for 20, 30 years, and they're the first ones like at the table, right? And we go, hey, let us show you this. And they just kind of like sit back, and like, who's this dude? Like, what's going on, right? And then we go out into the field, into their world, right? And we give them this thing, and we actually show them, they actually do it. And then they actually do their work the way that they would have done it. We do this all the time. We love it. And, he or she's like, oh, look here. They show us everything in the report. And then we show them what this little tiny thing that they control, by the way, it's not a robot. They just wheel it down in there, pull it back up, watch this thing. And they go, oh my gosh, I missed these 7 things. And I'm like, well, yeah, you were set up for failure from day one. You're straddling a 36-inch diameter hole with a flashlight, with a tablet trying to take photos down a 40-foot column, right? No human, sorry, unless we got some like people that are like Spider-Man or woman here, you're set up for failure, right? And so what I love about some of the things that we're doing, and I never really expected this until I actually saw it over and over again, is their eyes just like light up. And then you're thinking, oh, that's a 55-year-old person right now. And I bet I've made his back feel really good at night when he doesn't have to like bend over these, and be unsafe, right? Or in confined spaces or what have you. So I think there is something to that. Again, very much extracted from the creative side, but I think there's just so much practicality in some of this stuff that is really.
I would say, okay.
Well, I mean, I can read both sides of this. I mean, we use a lot of machine learning to do automated tracking of animal movement from video data that we used to have to employ an army of undergrads to manually collect.
Yeah.
And it was insufferable for them. And it was insufferable for me to train them knowing they were going to spend 200 hours of a semester putting little dots on the knees of jumping spiders or butterflies, or whatever it is. It's really exciting for the first 10 minutes, and then it was awful. And what's beneficial about using machine learning to do that kind of work is that it enables us not only to see things we couldn't really see them faster, but it allows the people in my research team to do more interesting things and ask interesting questions. So I can totally see that side of this, and I can see that with artists as well, exploring a possibility space as they're kind of generating ideas before they land on something that they might want to do. But I want to just mention another thread I'm hearing, which is harm, right? So there is the potential for harm, and this is where the legal stuff comes in. So copyright is really intended to protect copyright holders from harm, from the devaluation. So if you can generate something basically identical to what an artist's body of work looks like, that harms the artist, right?
Yeah.
And I guess thinking about the possibility for harm being that, for example, your algorithms fail to see some unique abnormality in a pipe and it impacts a community, who do you blame? Where does the buck stop? Now, maybe easier, you blame the public utility, right? But it's who's to blame there, and who's to blame if it's just publicly accessible?
It's really simple. It's already well past its life, so I mean that's really the answer in most situations.
You know, we've had conversations about basically who's to blame when Tesla's autopilot, which is AI-based, makes an error. It's the person
Well, and
Tesla.
they just announced they're going back more to radar, right, from LiDAR. Like they're actually going backwards to a technology they were using ahead because they're actually seeing the data come in and they're saying, oh, LiDAR is not catching as much of it as we should. Now they're augmenting again. So yeah, it's
But from the legal standpoint, it becomes muddy who to blame when these technologies induce harm into industries and people's lives and to.
That's why we pay a lot of lawyers to write our contracts.
That's how we stay employed.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, even in the art space, you can't copyright a style. So
Really?
yeah, it's a debate as to whether we should be able to, and maybe with AI that'll force it. But you know, you can put in 70 Picasso paintings, and you have to create where AI can have that mental process is the human being creating the algorithms that lead to the result. But you can still create a Picasso. It's not technically a Picasso, but you could make one very much in the style of Picasso. And then most of them are out of copyright now, but actually I think all of them now. But if, for instance, the estate of Picasso went after you because you're trying to make something that could infringe on their market, like you can't have anything that infringes on another person's market. That's the big point of copyright. Well, you could say, well, computer did it, but who made the like who added that algorithm? So you have to trace it. But yeah, the gray area is where we stay employed. So
wouldn't this be always the problem?
Huh?
Wouldn't this be always the problem?
Sure.
Depends.
It depends, I think.
Yeah.
But it becomes harder to anticipate how these technologies can be used. Like it's not hard to anticipate how a hammer can be used. Yeah, there's all sorts of unanticipated things that you can do with a hammer, but they're in a smaller space than, for example, an artificial intelligence algorithm. It could be redeployed for all sorts of things you didn't intend it for. So I think the possibility space for what a technology like that can do is just much more multivariate.
Well, I think we talk a lot about copyright, obviously, but I actually think about it more from the world of who's going to ultimately get all the patents.
Yeah.
Because right now we're very fortunate that a lot of these services are very much open source. They're research based, right? Public universities, et cetera, et cetera. But you know that there's just as many that are locked down inside of enterprises, and they're going to wrap up black boxes. And I think that will be really interesting to see like how that all plays out, and if it does force changes to a lot of what I would say is pretty draconian language in the law, right?
Yeah, I think that's the issue in general, like with the law kind of being behind technology in a lot of ways. I think going back to, I think it was your point, Anu, like the idea that using AI as a tool is beneficial if you can consider it like a symbiotic back and forth. then it does bring us to kind of step up our game in a little bit of a sense. Like if you can start to envision outside of maybe what you have already kind of figured as your style, figured as the way that you like to, produce an art piece, there is that opportunity. I think that it comes down to what can we offload into a computer system or into an AI system? Because just like there are limits to human perception, there are limits to AI systems. Like you spit out a picture of a person and that person's gonna have like 7 fingers in this current state of AI, because AIs are not really great with generating pictures of fingers, because that's not something that is, I guess, easy for them to understand or easy for them to grasp, like the architecture of fingers. And so it's like, yeah, if you want a person with like 6 fingers and 14 toes, that's fine, great, totally cool, nothing wrong with that. But like if you're looking for that extra realism, AI, I don't think is, at least to my knowledge on the like open source space, is not there yet. And so just like there's a limit to humans' ability to perceive and then create things from our own experience, there's that limit to who's controlling the AI, who's building the system. And so there's that ceiling, but there's also the computing power, there's also the technical limitations of AI. So
this is all so fascinating, and I think we can continue to go down these rabbit holes in terms of perception, AI, and the ethics behind it. But we're at time, so it's a little bit past 9. But I want to give everybody a round of applause for just coming here. Just participating in this open forum, this open discussion. There were some very interesting statements, questions, topics, a lot of things to think about, suggestions of programs to tinker with, because they do sound really cool. Right. Some of us may stick around for a bit, so if you definitely want to mingle with some of the guest speakers, please do so. Thanks again for our guest speakers for coming. And yes. As a reminder, IRiS does these alloy series every month, as Nate mentioned, in different spaces. So definitely be on the lookout for upcoming events regarding this next year. We hope to see you all there. So this concludes our alloy series. Stick around if you like, and thanks again. Hi, Mom.
Right, I know, right?
No, she at work.